Hey guys, this is Notorious BLT. I just wanted to give you guys a quick primer about the game that we're going to be playing on Saturday. So, when you get into Roll20, first thing you're going to see is this, the chat. What you want to do is go over to this wheel, this gear, scroll all the way to the bottom, go to I want to broadcast to others, hit nothing, and then go I want to receive from others, nothing. And then probably reconnect because that's going to, update your settings. You can also change your name if you wish. The reason I say that you want to do that is that you don't want to be broadcasting over this since we're going to be broadcasting over Discord. And so we don't want to have an echo, okay? The other thing is you may want to play with the master music volume because Roll20 tends to get a little loud, so you may want to turn it down a bunch. All right, now let's get into how you guys are going to be playing the game. I already tried to record this once, but I forgot to turn on the ability to see the mouse cursor, so it made pointing to things very not effective. Let's just go down the list. We'll talk about everybody's kind of main combat cycle, okay? And then we'll talk about all your abilities. MK, you are a Halfling Ranger, Beastmaster Ranger. Waji, you are a human wizard with a bow who uses their bow as an arcane focus. What that means is you cast your spells through your bow. That's mostly for role-playing and kind of flavor purposes, but that's okay. We don't need to be super, sticklers about everything. You know what I'm saying? Well, yeah, I think you understand. Krieg, you are a cleric, a lizard man cleric. And then Nick, you are a dragonborn paladin. And this is MK's bird. All right, so quick overview of how MK works. MK has this spell called Hunter's Mark. What Hunter's Mark does is you choose an enemy, you put the spell on them, and then every time you hit them, you do extra damage. So what you want to do, MK, is take your spell, put it on an enemy, and then smack them with your scimitars. These two things right here. I gave you two because you have this special fighting technique, two-weapon fighting. So you attack with two weapons every turn, provided you actually have enough actions to do so. So the way the game generally operates is you move, you have movement, and then you have an action, which is usually casting a spell or attacking, or doing a bunch of various other actions, possibly, but maybe not. We can get into those, like if you guys want to do something special, we can talk about that. But mostly it's move, action, and then possibly a bonus action. For you, MK, you use your bonus action to either cast Hunter's Mark or make a second attack with your scimitar. You also have a short bow, so if you want to cast, like, say, Hunter's Mark and use your short bow, you can totally do that. Or you can cast Hunter's Mark and attack with a scimitar, but not both scimitars, because you would use a bonus action to attack with your secondary scimitar. Let's talk a little bit about stats since we're already here. They're all kind of self-explanatory. Strength, dexterity, how nimble you are, constitution, how hardy you are, like your physical hardiness, intelligence, how brainy you are, wisdom, how wise and perceptive, and charisma, how good you are at speaking, and also how good looking you are. It's kind of a weird thing to have mashed into one, but hey. Although this doesn't necessarily mean that you're like a +1 charisma doesn't necessarily mean that you are only above average looking. You can be very good looking, but not be very good at talking to people, and that kind of equalizes out. You know what I'm saying? So those are your stats. Each of these smaller numbers, smaller as in quantity. So like 20 is obviously higher than 5. So 5 is your modifier for the ability. Okay, for your dexterity. 0 is your modifier for strength, 2 is your modifier for constitution, 0 is your modifier for intelligence, 3 is your modifier for wisdom, 1 is your modifier for charisma. What that means is when I ask you to make saving throws, which are these guys, or skill tests, which are these guys, or ability checks, that's these, you just click on the name, I'll show you. So like if I ask you to make a dexterity check, bang, there you go, rolled to 21. We'll get into what all that stuff means. I don't want to get too deep into things, okay? I want this to be somewhat shorter and just to give you guys a primer as to what everything does and how this all works. So let's say you were in combat, all right, and you're like, I want to cast Hunter's Mark. So you go to your spell tab, you click Hunter's Mark. Cast at what level? First. There's no reason to upcast this. Some spells can be upcast. We'll talk about that in a sec. Cast that, it tells everybody what it does. I already know, but if you want to put this into chat, feel free. And then you say, okay, I put Hunter's Mark on somebody. I want to attack them with my scimitar. Actually, I got to add... You know what? Actually, this will be easier. There. Now we're going to add an extra d6 to this, because that's what Hunter's Mark does. So this is... You can attack with a scimitar, and you can just click this multiple times if you want to attack multiple times. Or you can attack with a scimitar with Hunter's Mark active. Actually, I should add one for your short bow as well. Short bow, which is going to be a dex attack. You guys don't need to know how to do this. This is just, I'm doing this right now so that I can, 2d6, so that I can just have this ready. You know what I'm saying? Oops. Dang it. Okay. Okay, cool. All right. So you got this. You hit the same thing that has your Hunter's Mark on it, and you hit this. Okay, that's a bad roll. That's why it's red. But when you roll attack rolls in this game, in this program, it rolls your attack roll and your damage at the same time just to get them both done, you know, instead of having to roll it a bunch of times. When you make any of these ability tests, skill checks, or saving throws or attacks, what you're doing is you're rolling what's called a d20. That's a 20-sided die, a die with 20 faces, and adding the appropriate modifiers. In this case, your proficiency bonus, because you are proficient with the weapons that you're using, and then whatever applicable ability would go along with that. In this case, it is your dexterity. So, in this case, you rolled a 1 and then added 8, and you got a 9. Not great. But that's okay, because this is all just a test. All right, let's get into some of the other bits about you. Oh, I said upcasting spells. So you have this Cure Wounds spell. You can cast Cure Wounds, and what it does is it basically restores hit points. That's its main function. Now, if you cast Cure Wounds, you can upcast it, and what it does is it adds dice to the healing. Okay? It basically adds 1 die for every level that you cast the spell up. Okay? I don't know why this is lower, but all right. Also, when you cast a spell, you have these things called spell slots for each specific level. So, like, you have 4 first-level spell slots and 2 second-level spell slots. Whenever you cast a spell using a first-level spell slot, so like if you cast a first-level Cure Wounds, you deduct one of your spell slots. If you cast a spell using a second-level spell slot, or like, for example, upcast Cure Wounds to a second level, you use a second-level spell slot. All right? And these are regained when you take what's called a long rest. A long rest means that you are resting for 8 hours. You are basically going to sleep and trying to sleep off some of the injuries that you've taken, etc. There's also a thing called a short rest, which is mainly used to restore hit points and certain abilities. The way you restore hit points is these things called hit dice. We don't really need to get too much into that, but just know that you can restore hit points via a short rest, and a long rest just completely restores all of your hit points. And a short rest lasts an hour. Okay? So you spend an hour just like having a snack, having a drink, chilling out, not doing strenuous stuff. Okay, let's get into what some of these other numbers mean. Armor class is basically how hard you are to hit. This is usually a number from 10 to generally like around 20-ish. Is not the maximum that you can get, but 20 is a pretty dang high AC. It's quite high. Initiative is how fast you are. When combat starts, you are going to click this button, this little word, initiative, and it's going to roll your initiative for you. Okay, so there you go. Speed is how far you can move in a turn. Each square is 5 feet. So MK has a speed of 25 feet and can move 5 squares. You have 50 hit points. You can read these. These are just... these are things from your background and your character building that I did that doesn't have anything to do with the actual mechanics of the game. It's If you guys want to roleplay, be my guest. If you don't feel the need. I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. And nobody else should be putting anybody else on the spot either. You have 20 arrows, so whenever you fire one, deduct this. Sometimes you might be able to get them back, sometimes not. Criminal contact, this is mostly for role-playing purposes. This lucky is one of your halfling traits. Basically, if you roll a 1, like this, on any of your d20 rolls, you get to re-roll that d20. I believe this is like once per round. Oh no, this is actually all the time. That's crazy. Brave, you get to move through enemy squares. Like if an enemy is occupying a square, so long as they're bigger than you, you get to move through their square. Or you can move through their square. Just be aware that if you do so, they may attack you. Because there's a thing called a reaction, where you can take an action off of your turn, but only if you still have a reaction available. Everybody always has one reaction during a combat round, but once the combat round is over, they regain their reactions. We'll go into this in more detail later. We don't need to go over this too much. You can also hide behind creatures that are bigger than you. We already talked about the 2-weapon fighting. You have a favorite enemy, which is humanoids, because originally I was going to have you be a bounty hunter, but this still fits, I think. So you get a +2 bonus to your damage rolls with attacks against humanoid enemies. You have this thing called coordinated attack, which means that when you attack something on your turn, if your animal companion, your bird, can see you, it gets to use its reaction to make a melee attack. And then we get into some other ranger stuff that is very complicated. Well, some of it's very complicated, but not all of it. You ignore difficult terrain when you're moving. You have advantage on initiative rolls. Advantage is a D&D mechanic where when you make like one of these D20 rolls, you roll two D20s and take the highest. There's also a mechanic called disadvantage, which is you roll 2 D20s and take the lowest. And when I say take the highest or lowest, I mean the face on the die, and then you add your modifiers to that. And on your first turn of combat, you have advantage on attack rolls against creatures that have not yet acted during the combat. Let's see. This is all stuff that probably won't come into play, but that's okay. And then you have primeval awareness. Basically, you meditate for a little bit, and then you figure out if there are beasties or... no, I'm sorry, not beasties. You can figure out if there are humanoids nearby. And I think it also allows you to do it with beasts as well. So like bears and tigers and just animals, basically. Your spells. Let's talk about your spells really quick. We already talked about Cure Wounds and Hunter's Mark. Protection from poison. You can cast it on somebody, and they get resistance to poison, which makes them take less damage from poison and also have advantage on saves against it. And also, if somebody's already poisoned, you can cast this on them to get rid of it, to get rid of the poison. Pass Without Trace is an upkeep spell. It's what's called the concentration spell that gives a stealth bonus to you and everybody around you that you pick. It's a pretty damn big stealth bonus, too. So let's talk about what some of these symbols mean. You see these like V, S, M, and the C. If you go over here and you click this little wheel, the most important stuff in your spell description is the stuff in these little descriptions here. The rest of this stuff we can talk about. You don't need to really know much about it. But what I will say is that when you see these symbols, this V, S, M, or C, C means it's a concentration spell. So like for this one, you can concentrate for up to an hour to keep it going. Concentration means that you can only have one concentration spell up at a time because you are concentrating on that spell. You're concentrating on keeping it up and doing something. It also means that if you get hit while you have a concentration spell up, you may have to make a save to avoid losing that spell. So like, you know, you're sitting there in your brain, you're thinking about the spell, like, hey, keep the spell up, and then somebody punches you in the gut, and then you lose concentration on the spell because you got punched in the gut. It may not always happen, but sometimes it does. So that's MK. Let's talk about the bird. The bird is pretty simple. Bird has dark vision. It can see in the dark, up to a certain distance, 120 feet. Flyby, it does not provoke opportunity attacks, which is that thing where somebody can use a reaction to hit you off of their turn. It doesn't provoke opportunity attacks when it flies through an enemy's reach. It has keen sight, so it has advantage, that rolling 2d20 thing, on perception checks. That's one of your skills. That rely on sight anyway. And it also has the same favorite enemy as you. Bird's got a lot of freaking hit points. It also does a lot of damage. Like, a lot of damage. It basically does the same damage as your Hunter's Marked attacks do. So Bird is pretty simple. Alright, Krieg. Let's talk about you, buddy. You have a bite attack that you can use if you don't have a weapon. I mean, you can use it if you have a weapon too, but it's better if you use it when you don't have a weapon. You can make gross weapons and shields out of enemies' parts. You can hold your breath for a really long time, 15 minutes in fact. Your natural armor is not going to come into play because you are wearing heavy plate armor. You can gain what's called temporary hit points, which is right here. You can modify this. Temporary hit points cannot be healed. Once they're gone, they don't come back. And you can gain those temporary hit points by biting somebody with the special ability that I believe you get to use once per short rest. Yeah, once per short or long rest. You also have a swimming speed. Normally, if you're swimming, your speed is halved. Krieg is a lizard person with a very powerful tail, which means that he can move pretty fast in water. This you don't have to worry about. This is more of your background stuff because you're a sailor. And then you have this ability called Channel Divinity. If I remember right, this is once per short rest. Yes. Yeah, once per short rest. I believe it's once per short rest. If not, I'll look it up and we can just go over this more. You can do one of two things. Turn undead, which is also destroy undead, if you're high enough level and the enemies are low enough level. Turn undead means that undead enemies will run away from you, maybe, because they make a save, and if they fail, then they run away from you. If you are vastly more powerful than them, they just explode, which is really good. You are also a life domain cleric, which means you value life over basically everything else. And you have this channel divinity ability that allows you to divide 25 hit points between all the friendly characters that you can see. So say all of your friends are down a little bit of hit points, you can use this to give them all like 5 hit points each. You also have Disciple of Life, which means that all of your healing spells get a bonus, which is 2 plus the spell's level. So let's say that you cast Cure Wounds at 3rd level. Well, going by what this says, you would add 5 to whatever you roll for the spell. So you would roll, let's see, where is it? Where'd it go? Healing Word. Here we go. It's changed again. That's a lot. That's a lot, dude. Actually, you'd add even more to that than this. It would actually be 29. That's crazy. Oof. That's a lot of healing, dude. That is a lot of healing. Jesus. All right. Well, and that is exactly how I set you up, is to be a healing monster. So let's talk about your abilities here. You got your Warhammer. You can two-hand your Warhammer to up the die 1, which you go from a D8, which is 1 to 8 damage, to 1 to 10 damage, or a D10. You have a light crossbow just in case you want to shoot somebody. Cure Wounds. Some of your spells and abilities are already on here. So you got Cure Wounds, Guiding Bolt. Guiding Bolt is an offensive spell that when you hit an enemy with it, the next attack against them has advantage. Then you got Healing Word, which is like a Cure Wounds, but it's ranged, because Cure Wounds is, you have to be right up next to somebody, you have to touch them. Healing Word is, I believe, a range of 30 feet, so you can yell at somebody, be like, hey, shake it off, and then they do. And then you got Mass Healing Word, which is just a massive version of this. You get to choose multiple targets. Sacred Flame is what's called a cantrip. You can cast cantrips, these spells, as many times as you want. There are no spell slots for them. You never run out. So let's talk about them. Spare the Dying. Basically, if somebody is actually dying and you can't get to them yet, cast Spare the Dying on them. Light creates light. Sacred Flame is an offensive spell. Somebody makes a save, and if they fail, they take radiant damage? Radiant damage. So like holy damage. Guidance. Cast it on somebody before they make an ability test, and they get to add a d4, which is 1 to 4. Basically, you add 1 to 4 to whatever they roll. Let's see. Then you got Bless. They get advantage. Or wait, advantage? Oh no! Whenever they make an attack roll or saving throw, they get to add a d4 to the roll, to the number, to whatever they rolled. Then we already talked about Guiding Bolt, Healing Word, Protection from Good and Evil. It makes it so that certain types of enemies, aberrations, celestials, and we don't need to worry about this stuff. We can get into it later. Just generally evil or good things, you get bonuses to, I believe it's... Oh, they get disadvantage to attack the target. And also they can't be charmed or possessed. Things like that. Lesser Restoration. If somebody is blinded, deafened, or paralyzed, you want to cast this on them because it'll get rid of it. Or poisoned, I believe. Spiritual Weapon, you summon a weapon that you don't have to hold that can float around and hit things for you. Aid gives people temporary hit points. And oh no, I'm sorry, not temporary hit points. It actually increases their maximum hit points by 5. Let's see. Continual flame is basically you make a flame that doesn't run out. It's kind of like making a torch flame. It's a little bit like light, I guess. Let's see. Hold person is basically you paralyze somebody for a little while. Prayer of Healing is something you want to use outside of combat, but it heals a bunch of hit points to a bunch of people. So 2d8 plus your spellcasting ability, which is your wisdom, to, I believe it's like 6 creatures. Oh no, it's any number of creatures that you can see within range, which is like 30 feet. But it takes like a minute to cast, so you want to cast that out of combat. Because the way combat rounds work is one combat round consists of every single character or actor within the combat getting a turn. A combat round usually lasts, it supposedly lasts about 6 seconds, not in real time, but in like game narrative time. So something taking a minute means it takes 10 rounds to cast, which means 10 rounds of you doing nothing but casting that spell. So that's why you want to cast it outside of combat. Silence is you make a bubble of area where nobody can talk, which is detrimental to a lot of different spells. See this VSM on some of these spells? Those are different components. Things that you need to do to cast the spell. Verbal means you need to say something. Semantic means you have to have some hand gestures. Material means you actually have to have, like in this case, a sprinkling of holy water that you actually use to cast the spell, and that is consumed within by casting the spell. You guys have everything you need to cast all the spells, okay? There's no components or no spells I put in here that you can't cast. And then Warding Bond, I believe this adds people's AC. Yeah, it adds to AC and gives... Oh yeah, it gives a bonus to saving throws and has resistance to all damage. Resistance means that they take half damage. I believe this is touch? Yes. How long does it last? Wow. That's a long time. That's an hour. That's an hour that you get to make somebody a super tank. That is an hour that you get to make somebody a super tank. Then you got Beacon of Hope, which the main thing about this spell is everybody that you target with it gets advantage on their wisdom saving throws and death saving throws. Basically, if you're unconscious from being dropped to 0 hit points, you have to make what's called death saving throws. And if you fail 3 of them, you die. But the main thing here is that everybody that's touched by this regains the maximum number of hit points possible from healing spells. So that means you don't even have to roll. You just tell me what the maximum is, and that's what they heal. Revivify is your resurrection spell. I think this... no, okay. It takes 1 action to cast, so it's very fast. Even if in combat, you can cast this. So if somebody dies, you can actually bring them back. Then you got Mass Healing Word, which is like Healing Word, but it affects a bunch of people. All right, so that's Krieg. Next. We got Nick. Nick, you're a Dragonborn. You're very strong because you're a paladin. You're also very charismatic because you're a paladin, because charisma is your spellcasting thing. Your spellcasting ability modifier. You are a soldier. And again, this is your background stuff. You have 5 javelins in case you want to chuck them at somebody. You've got a Morning Star and a flail. You've also got the javelins, like I mentioned, and also flame breath because you're a red dragonborn. So you can make a cone of fire come out of your face and burn people, but only once per short rest or long rest. Let's go over some of this other stuff. This is more background stuff. Dragon ancestry, kind of background stuff. Breath weapon. This is where you get to do your damage with your face. Then you got damage resistance to fire because you're a red dragon. Red dragonborn. So red dragons breathe fire, whereas like green dragons breathe corrosive, poisonous garbage. Just poisonous stuff. Corrosive stuff is a different dragon. Anyway, fighting style protection. If an enemy attacks you or somebody within 5 feet of you, as a reaction, you can impose disadvantage on their attack roll. But you have to tell me before I make the roll. Divine Sense, basically you can meditate to detect certain kinds of enemies within a certain distance of you, and you can do it 5 times per long rest. Lay on Hands. You have a pool of hit points you can distribute to your friends by touching them. If you wish, you can also... This does not deduct hit points from you. It's just a pool of hit points that you can heal on people. If you wish, you can also spend 5 hit points at once to heal a disease or neutralize a poison on a friend. Divine Smite. This is one of the things that the Paladin does really great. You get to spend your spell slots to do extra holy damage. So you spend like a first level spell slot, as it says right here, and you can do 2d8, that's 2 to 16 extra holy damage. You can spend a higher spell slot to do 1 extra die for every level above 1. So like if you spend a 2 level spell slot, you get 3d8. If you spend a 3rd level spell slot, you get 4d8. Okay? And if the target is undead or a fiend, you get an extra d8 of damage anyway. Alright. Divine Health, you are immune to disease. Sacred Oath, you took the Devotion Oath. Because that's what you did. So you have Channel Divinity, much like the Cleric does, and you can regain it. Same way. Except yours gives you a bonus to attack rolls for 1 minute equal to your Charisma modifier. What does that mean? Well, your Charisma modifier is a 4. Attacking with your Flail, Morningstar, or Javelin, you have a +8 to hit. If you use your, what the heck is this thing called? Your Devotion Oath Channel Divinity thing, a Sacred Weapon, that's what it's called. You will add another 4 to that, meaning that you, for a minute, you have +12 to hit, which is a lot. You can also use it to turn undead. Not destroy undead, but turn undead. You also have an extra attack every turn. So you are the only character that gets to make 2 attacks every turn, no matter what. Nobody can stop you from it. You don't have to take extra actions to do so. You say, I use my action to attack. You get 2 attack rolls. So you say, I attack with the flail. There you go. You attacked with the flail. Bang, bang. You roll a 12 and a 23. Jesus. That's a lot. That's quite a bit. My God. All right. Let's talk about your spells here. Protection from good and evil. We've talked about it. Sanctuary. Basically, it makes it so that enemies have a harder time even recognizing that you exist. You're probably not going to use this as much. You're mostly going to be using this in case there's like an oh shit moment and you want to get out of combat to heal yourself. Heroism. You pick a creature and they gain temporary hit points, and I believe they become immune to fear. Yeah, they become immune to being frightened. Things that are frightening are things like dragons and demons and things that are like, pants-pooping terror. Shield of Faith. You choose a creature and you give them +2 to their AC to their armor class for up to 10 minutes. Compel Duel. This is a pretty interesting tanking type spell. You choose an enemy and basically it doesn't have to attack you, but it is highly incentivized to attack you and only you. Cure Wounds we've talked about. Lesser Restoration we've talked about. Zone of Truth. You cast it. Everybody in the zone that fails the save, or I believe you have to fail the save, yeah? Yeah, they have to make a save. If they fail the save, they must tell the truth. Now, that doesn't mean that if you ask them a question that they are compelled to answer. They can just not answer if they want to. But if they answer, they must tell the truth. Branding Smite. You do some extra damage, and you also make the creature radiate light, and it becomes incapable of becoming invisible. So if you think that the creature might be able to try to become invisible, like if it's a wizard and it has the invisibility spell, or you think it does, you can use Branding Smite on it, and then it can't become invisible. Or, well, it can try, and then it fails. And then Magic Weapon. Magic Weapon, you touch a weapon, and it basically acts as if it has been enchanted. So it gains a +1 to attack and damage rolls. And now, Waji. You, sir, have... And I'll talk about... Well, actually, okay. You know what? Let's talk about this right here first. If you are going to be rolling something with advantage, click this. Once you click this, everything on here is going to be rolled with advantage, which means you're going to be rolling 2d20 and taking the highest. Normal is how you should always... is how you should generally be set up. You should basically almost always be on normal. And kind of the same thing with disadvantage. Like these two are for special circumstances, mostly. Okay, so now Waji. As a wizard, you don't have a very high armor class, because wizards don't have access to heavy armor. You can have access to heavy armor, you just don't. Because you haven't taken abilities that allow you to do so yet. Now, what I gave you is high intelligence, because you're a wizard and you need intelligence, and high dexterity, because you said you wanted to use a bow. Your bow, I gave you a special feat for using bows. What this feat does, and the reason that you have it is because humans have an option where they can gain a feat instead of bonuses to some of their stats. Okay? Because every race gets bonuses to their stats at the start. But humans can say they want to take a feat instead of getting those bonuses. So, what this means is, at long range, you don't have any penalties with your bow. Most kinds of cover don't bother you whatsoever. So if somebody's like hiding behind a table and like ducking or peeking over to shoot you, you don't care about the cover. You shoot accurately enough that it doesn't matter. The other cool thing that this does is that before you make an attack, you can choose to subtract 5 from your attack roll and add 10 to your damage. That is a lot. A lot. Okay, I believe I mentioned this before, but if I haven't, we'll go over it in a second. Or we'll go over it right now. Your spell slots. You can only regain them by taking a long rest. That's the go to sleep and then, wake up after recovering from your injuries, sleep. Or rest. Except for Waji. Waji, you can regain up to 3 levels of spell slots during a short rest. What that means is, if you use 3 first level spell slots, 1, 2, 3, you take a short rest, you can regain those, 1, 2, 3. Or if you used a level 2 and a level 1, you could regain both of those. Or if you used a level 3 spell slot, you could regain that as well. The other thing that you got is every wizard gets an arcane tradition. Yours was evocation, which is basically, evocation is the kind of magic that blows things up and kills stuff. What it does is, when you cast a spell, essentially what it means is that you can choose a number of creatures equal to 1 plus the level of the spell that the spell does not affect. So say Krieg and Nick are mixing it up in melee combat with some horrible enemy, and you want to throw an ice bomb at them. Ice bomb is a spell that's going to cause a huge explosion. For all of you who played D&D before, it's basically just a reskinned version of Fireball. Just much like Ice Lance is a reskinned version of Lightning Bolt. Ice bomb makes a very large explosion of ice. You can say, I don't want Nick to be affected, I don't want Krieg to be affected, and they don't take any damage, but everything else in there takes damage. Now, because this is a 3rd level spell, you could choose 4 people instead of 2, but I don't know why you would choose an enemy to not take damage. So let's just ignore that I even said that. Let's go over your spells. You got Chill Touch, which is a ranged thing. I know it says touch, but basically you summon like a ghastly hand, a ghostly hand, that touches a creature and then sucks the life out of them. It does necrotic damage, I think, which is like rotting damage, and then the creature can't heal until the start of your next turn. Or until like after the start of your next turn. Ray of Frost, you make a Ray of Frost and it slows things down. The one that you'll probably be using the most is Ice Bolt. These are cantrips, which means you can cast them as many times as you wish. Not as many times as you wish in a turn, just you never run out of slots to cast them. So this spell does 2d10 damage every time you hit with it. So 2 to 20 damage every time you shoot this Ice Bolt. Then you have True Strike, which is, I gave you this to use in conjunction with your bow and your feet. So yeah, you get the -5 to hit, but then if you cast this the turn previous, you gain advantage on your attack roll, which means you get to roll 2d20. You also have Mage Armor, which increases essentially what it's going to do is increase your armor class by 3. So your armor class is going to become a 13. Or 17, I'm sorry. The way armor class works is that it starts at a base of 10. And then you add onto that. So 10 plus your dexterity modifier, which is a 4, becomes 14, plus your mage armor. So you get 17. So this is a spell you want to cast on yourself kind of basically at the beginning of the day. And because it lasts 8 hours, and it's not a concentration spell, so if you get hit, it doesn't matter. Shield is a reaction spell that you can use when, say, somebody hits you. You can use Shield. You can burn a spell slot to use Shield, and add 5 to your armor class until the end of the combat round. Or sorry, until the beginning of your next turn. So you would effectively go from an armor class of 17 to an armor class of 22, which is extremely high. And then you have Ice Sheet, which is basically you make a sheet of ice on the ground that enemies will slip on and fall over. Tasha's Hideous Laughter, which is you you tell a joke, probably a horrible joke, and then the enemy that you cast it on makes a save, and if they fail, they fall to the ground laughing and can't help themselves and are stunned with laughter. Freezing Ray is a reskin of a spell called Scorching Ray. And what it does is you make 3 ice rays that do a bunch of damage, 2d6 damage each. So basically you're doing 66 damage if you choose one target. But you have to roll the hit for each ray. Blur is a defensive spell. You make it harder for enemies to hit you. They roll disadvantage to hit you. Misty Step is a spell you want to use if somebody gets next to you that you don't want to have next to you, like, I don't know, an ogre, an orc, an evil dragon, something that's going to try to tear you apart in melee. You use this spell, and it teleports you 30 feet. Web is similar in usage to Ice Sheet, but it is much worse for whoever gets stuck in it. Ice Lance is a 5 foot wide, so 1 square wide, 100 foot long lance of ice that shoots out from you and does 8 to 48 damage, provided the enemies in there fail their save. If they make it, they take half, and that's fine. Ice Bomb, kind of like Ice Lance, but it makes a big explosion instead of a big line. I think there is at least one other thing that I need to speak on, but I don't remember what it is. Oh, Jesus, I forgot to give you a speed. Your speed is 30. Everybody else have speed? Yes? Yeah, well, I'll fix that later if it is actually necessary. Let's see here. I don't think there's really much else to go on about, but I know this was kind of a long thing for just an explanation of how everybody kind of works. Actually, I should speak a little bit on how you function normally, Waji. Basically, what you're going to be doing is either casting a True Strike and then using your bow, or shoving ice bolts down people's throats. And then in, like, big situations, using Freezing Ray, and in the most horrible of situations, using Ice Lance or Ice Bomb. Because these are your big multi-target damage-dealing things. Nick, you're pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to go into melee and beat the holy hell out of everything. And then when things are really bad, use your Divine Smite. Krieg, you are also basically designed for melee, but you don't do as much damage as Nick does. You're not quite as hardy as Nick. You're just about, though. You only got 4 less hit points than he does. But actually, I would say that arguably you are just as hardy, if not more hardy than Nick, because you can also heal yourself much like he can, except that your healing spells are better. Nick is just very good at killing things in melee. Krieg, you're very good at saving your friends. MK, you are extraordinarily versatile. You can operate in range or melee, and you also have this bird to annoy the crap out of your enemies. Excuse me? Yeah, don't do that. Okay, so let's talk about what's going to happen when combat starts. In order to determine how things work in what order people go in combat, what you're going to do is, well, I'll say you've encountered enemies or something to that effect. Roll initiative. So you guys are going to get over to your sheet and hit this button. Bang. Rolled an initiative of 10. Basically, the higher the initiative, the better. Why is this it? Oh, this is the eagle, right. Now, MK, you actually have to roll initiative for your bird and for you. Okay? Now, Roll20 has a thing that we can use to have an initiative tracker. I'm just going to keep it on a piece of paper, because there's no point in taking up screen real estate with more garbage. Now, here's something that you may want to know, especially if you have two monitors. If you click this button, you pop this out into another Chrome window, or, Firefox or Explorer or Safari, and then you can move it off screen, okay? Or, well, for me, I'm moving it to my second monitor, but you don't have to do that. And you don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I generally do. Let's see. So, I think that's just about it. Yeah, any other in-depth questions we can cover on Saturday when things start at noon. This is Saturday, September 22nd. And for those of you who are unaware, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but that's too bad. What's going to be happening is Saturday, September 22nd, at 12 noon my time, which is Eastern United States, I'm going to be running a Dungeons & Dragons one-shot for 4 people who've been around at the channel for a while. Uh, as I don't want to say it's a reward because that, I don't know, it just sounds not right to me. It's more of a celebration of the sub goal. Well, it's not even a sub goal. It's just that we hit 300 subscribers, and we were trying to figure out what would be a cool thing to do. And I figured, you know what? These people haven't played D&D before. Let's do D&D. You know, I'll run a one shot and you know, to introduce people to the game, and we'll go from there. All right. So I hope to see you all on Saturday, and yeah, I'll see you all on Saturday. Have a good day or night or whenever this posts. Bye bye, everybody.